Hi, my name is Dave Elkington. I'm the founder of a company called Zant. I'm also an investor and board member here with a company who's hosting the event, Chat Funnels. And I could not be more excited to introduce Heather Zynczak, who has been a friend, a mentor, and one of the luminaries in marketing and the tech ecosystem. I think anyone who's been in tech has some exposure and some connection to her. She's been at some of the largest companies in the world, SAP, Oracle, some of the most successful tech startups, Domo and Pluralsight, both Utah companies, and frankly has been really someone who's led the demand marketing strategy, really, I think, in the industry. So I could not be more excited to introduce Heather. And again, she's been a friend. I've known her. And frankly, I'll pick her brain anytime I get a chance. So we're lucky we got 40 minutes with her. If I'll shut up and just let's get into it. So Heather, thanks for joining us. We have, I think, an amazing group, over 2,000-3,000 people watching live right now. Would love to get to know a little bit about you. Like, give us your background. How did you get into tech? How did you get into marketing?
Oh, thanks, Dave. And when you called and asked me if we could have a conversation, I always love our conversations through the years, from backstage at Silicon Slopes to I always corner you and try to chat about stuff to other times. So when you called to chat, I said, why not do it in front of several thousand people? That's awesome. But since it's live, I'll try my best behavior.
We talked a little beforehand, and I'm like, we just got to be quiet and just actually record this thing, because this is such amazing stuff. So again, I think people, as they understand your background, will kind of get a sense of, in my opinion, why I think you're such an interesting person to listen to and learn from. So again, give us kind of, so you're from Texas. How did you go from there to, what you're doing today?
I am from Texas, go Horns. And I went to undergrad there and got a finance and accounting degree, but it was the early 90s. And I was like, this computer thing's going to be pretty big. So
it may take off.
Yeah. And so I decided to, I started my first job out of college was being a developer. So I worked at Anderson Consulting, where they trained you for 6 weeks on how to code. And my first job was sitting in a room about the size of a postage stamp with 8 dudes coding for 80 hours a week. And I loved it because I'm very analytical and mathematical, and coding is very rational and logical. And I did that for a number of years, and then wanted to be a little bit more strategic and help companies figure out what they needed to automate and why they needed technology. And I went to my partner at Accenture, and you get to meet with him once a year for like 15 minutes. And I think I was between him and the cocktail hour. And I said, hey, I want to be more strategic. And he was like, I should tell you to work hard and we'll put you on some different projects. But he's like, go back to business school. So I did. And then when I got out, I worked in strategy consulting. And then I was in the Bay Area, living in San Francisco, in the heart of the belly of the beast of Silicon Valley, and jumped back into tech full on. And you mentioned worked for some very small companies, worked for some big companies, and then joined the Utah ecosystem a little over a decade ago. And the rest is history. It's just been a phenomenal and amazing ride. And I've learned so much along the way.
Well, and some just crazy successes, right? I mean, I think very risky. You joined some early technology startups. You went from SAP, kind of a behemoth, to Domo. And and Josh James, who's the CEO of Domo, is brilliant. And if you can harness some of his genius, it's like anyone who's worked with Josh, he's brilliant, and he is going a million miles an hour. And you were able to do that and leverage that to a company that ultimately went public and has become wildly successful. And then you did, frankly, the same thing again at Pluralsight, which is another tech company, early-ish startup, and you helped take them public. Tell us a little bit about some of what you did in those two organizations, especially. I think that's kind of interesting. And we'll get to this. You're really now in an advisory role where you sit on several boards, and I think you're adding more boards to your portfolio. So you really sit in more of a strategic role, but as you were really an operator, what were some of the highlights that you were able to accomplish, first at Domo, and then you shared some of the things at Pluralsight, which are kind of crazy, like the kind of scale and growth and what you did there. I haven't heard really very many people be able to do what you did. So let's, again, start at Domo and then tell us a little bit about Pluralsight.
Sure. So wildly different companies, but both led by amazing CEOs and founders that I learned a ton from. Domo started out when I joined, it was hilarious. I can't believe Josh took a leap of faith on me because I'd never been a CMO before, but they had zero in revenue and hadn't, I think we're in the process of signing their Series A round. So, some could argue, did I take the leap of faith? But I think Josh took a leap of faith in me. And we went to go have lunch, and I never thought I'd work at Domo. I was like, my next job was to move to Germany, and I knew exactly what my next role was at SAP. And we were looking forward to doing an international assignment. And I was like, I'm going to go to lunch with this guy because I've heard he's crazy. And this will be entertaining, if nothing else. And he is crazy, but crazy brilliant. Yeah. And I just fell in love with what Josh was trying to accomplish and wanted to be along for the ride. And it was crazy, doors flying off. I mean, we went from 0 to 100 million, I think, about in billings in the 5 years I was there, raised $500 million, just 100% year-over-year growth, launched the brand, launched the product. It was just insane. And I learned so much during that time. And one thing that solidified for me is just how much I love growth and how much I love building. Nothing is more fun than just seeing, your company take off like that. Those are the really, really fun stages. And I think the biggest thing, part of this, I think I learned from Josh, is to dream big. He dreams big and thinks big dreams, and everybody who's along for that ride has to feel the same way. You never tell him like, hey, I don't think we can do this, because the answer is like, well, why not?
Of course we can do it. Yeah, of course we can do it. Yeah, totally.
And every time he was right. Of course we could. And so it really helped me in further roles. Like when I went to Pluralsight and we were doing our first user conference, Aaron laughed at me when I was like, yeah, I'm looking through keynotes. There was this smaller company who's never had a user conference. And I was like, I'm thinking Michelle Obama, or, and I walk him through the list, and he looks at me like I have 3 heads. And it's because I came from the Josh James School of Anything Was Possible. And sure enough, our first user event, we had Michelle Obama as our keynote. And it was her first tech keynote that she'd ever done. We got her before Salesforce. And when she showed up, she said, this is your first user conference? And she looked at her people like, I can't believe you booked me. But it went swimmingly. But I think I think when you're in those early stages where you're really just trying to get off the ground, you have to dream big and don't let obstacles get in your way. And really, everybody on the team has to believe everything is possible. And I think moving to Pluralsight, when I started there, the company was at a little over 100 million in revenue, but had hit a bit of a lull in terms of growth. And they had this amazing, amazing product, but they hadn't built out an enterprise go-to-market motion yet. So they hired myself and a CRO who was a longtime industry veteran of enterprise sales. And we built a go-to-market engine and re-accelerated growth to over 50% year over year in B2B. And I think Morgan Stanley told us when we went public, our banker said we were the only company she knew of that re-accelerated growth that high, over 100 million. And it was and that one was about building. It was about looking at what you have. The greatest place, my favorite place to work, is somewhere that and both Domo and Pluralsight check this box, that has a truly amazing product that just needs to build the engine to take it to market, whether that's marketing it, building up demand for it, helping, get the sales reps trained and ramped and ready to close deals, whether it's the retention motion with customer success. But the best place to be, I think, for any of you that are out there in the job market or wondering what should my next company look like, find a company that has an amazing product that's poised for growth.
See, and I love the keyword you just used, growth, right? I mean, the thing that allows greatness to happen is just to drive growth. And frankly, you described some of what you did at Pluralsight. I'm going to actually have you just dig in a little bit more. Pluralsight was just a kind of an amazingly, but still strange ecosystem, because there was a B2C side of the business and a B2B side of the business. And I think it's an enviable position for any tech company, because you control your fate, because you're not necessarily relying on salespeople on one side, and the other side of the house, you're able to really drive the big meaty deals, the multi-year engagements, things like that on the other side of the house. Talk us through your role, what you were responsible for, what your partner, who was a CRO, was responsible for, and kind of how did you divide it and how did it work?
Yeah, so at Pluralsight, I owned everything you would think of marketing, from product marketing to analyst relations to demand to digital. And then I also owned the BDR or SDR or inside sales team. We had 100 plus folks who either took marketing leads and cleaned them for the outside or created leads for the outside reps. And then I also owned digital revenue. So everything that closed digitally was under me and not the CRO. And the reason that we did that is because the whole digital motion and the website and the MarTech stack, all of that's tied together. The second thing is, if you look at companies like Slack or Dropbox, who've been wildly successful, they start with offering something to individuals and then turning those individuals into large enterprise accounts. And so, when you go knock on the door of a Fortune 100 company and say, hey, by the way, did you know that 200 people in the building are already using our product?
The product, yeah.
For it on their company credit card and charging it in. Why wouldn't you get at least a 200 person license, but truthfully, you should get, 20,000. That's a really fun sales motion to be in. So we called it B to C to B, business to individuals, for us developers or consumers to business. So we move people through that. And it could be just a free offering, like a free trial. Ours also had a paid component that you could just pay on your own, and we would try to eventually convert you into a B2B deal. But it's super powerful, I think, for companies that are trying to grow. It's a great lead source.
So it's interesting. I just had a conversation with Godard Abel, who's the founder of and CEO of G2 Crowd, or G2 now. I think they've just rebranded. But he said the identical thing. He said one of the key trends is you've got to come up with this B2C to B model, whether there's a freemium component, or there's some way to really, what he kind of described it as a frictionless buying process that then can kind of blossom into something more. This growth title is something that's brand new. You brought that up. I want to dig into that a little bit more. You also talked about just kind of throwing kind of traditional wisdom out and just doing what, kind of breaking the rules. And I actually want to talk a lot about like what that means. And so let's first dive into, speaking of breaking the rules, we're all just coming off of what are arguably the most difficult months and quarters of our careers because of COVID-19. And it's been insanely difficult to come up with meaningful results. Everybody had to adjust their quarters. Everybody laid off. And then something, it came out of it. And one of the trends I'm hearing is there are lots of organizations who have had the best quarters of their company's history in Q3, Q4. How did you, because you were an operator for some of this, you transitioned to more of an advisor and board member through the tail end of this. How did you guys kind of experience COVID, and how are people being successful at kind of responding to it?
Yeah, I was at Pluralsight for 8 months of COVID, 9 months of COVID. And I was responsible for our crisis communications, so led the effort on some of the things we did in the marketplace. And, I would say for those companies that could figure out either that they were lucky enough to have a product that lended itself to remote, like look at Zoom and Instructure and, a bunch, off the chart growth. But even if you weren't lucky enough to have a product like that, what could you do? So at Pluralsight, we came in March and said, what can we do? And we said, let's give back, and let's give back to our customer community. So we gave away Pluralsight to individuals, just the individual product, which is about 7,000 courses, but the whole entire course library, no restrictions. You could do courses 24/7 if you wanted to. We gave it away for an entire month of April. And we had over 1 million people sign up for that.
Crazy.
And it was crazy. But that almost doubled our user base. And the first couple days, I was on the phone at 3 a.m. with our tech teams and our product teams, this can't break the product. It didn't, but
add more capacity. Yeah, totally.
We had no idea. Even our MarTech stack systems were we had to go out and talk to our vendors to double us up, because we had no idea it was going to be this successful. And we did it honestly altruistically, because we were sitting at home. What can we do? The best thing to do is to stay home and not be around people. And wear a mask. That's great, but what else can we do? And so it was me and my team's idea. We took it to the CEO and the CFO, and they were a little nervous because they're like, "What's this going to do for revenue?" And so when we did it, we weren't sure it would be a good thing for revenue. And the truth is, now we had over 1 million new leads. And if you think back to that B2C to B, it actually was really great financially for the company. It was impressive, but that's not why we did it. So I think that's a great example of making lemonade out of lemons. And I think, one of the companies that I advise and work with, they cater to the small business segment, and they've actually had some of their best quarters ever, even including, you said Q3 and Q4, but even including their Q2, because the small business owner who's just been inundated, they're scrapping you. The guy who owns a pet shop or owns has 5 employees owning a yoga studio, they're just so busy on day-to-day stuff. But COVID, in some ways, gave them a chance to breathe and say, what are the projects I've been putting off? And a lot of times it was things in their tech stack. Should I be looking at a new vendor for this? Should we be looking at a vendor for that? Should we automate this? And so the SMB space, this client that advice, theirs took off in COVID because they could actually get owners on the phone. They could get people to pay attention. And so I think, any company who sat back and said, how can we change our product, or how can we change our go-to-market, or how can we do something to take advantage of this situation is actually doing really well. And those people that just said, oh my gosh, this is just going to be 2020 sucks and we're just going to throw this year away, you're seeing it in their financial statements.
So I love what you just said, though, because I think not just in our personal lives, but I think also in our careers and our corporate lives, we get so stuck in this routine of we got to hit our month, we got to hit our quarter. And what COVID did is, I actually haven't heard anybody say it the way you just did, but it's really true. It forced everybody to take this, step back in their organizations and say, okay, what we're doing is not working. It kind of met the minimum monthly or quarterly goals, but COVID gave us all a bit of a pass to say, let's be strategic for a quarter or for 2 quarters or a year and do the things that in some cases we knew we needed to do. In other cases, we didn't know, but we took the strategic time to think through this. It's Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, has been a friend and mentor. And every year he'll spend about a month in Hawaii to do the same thing. And I never quite, I'm like, dude, you're just taking a vacation. I mean, come on, man. But he's like, no, if you don't stop to think, you'll never be better than you are. So I've never heard anyone actually kind of really summarize it that COVID forced us all to do that. So that's interesting. And some of us didn't.
Created a space for innovation because during COVID, most companies had to innovate or die. Yeah. And I think COVID created some really amazing innovation. And I think we're still at the beginning of it. I don't know. I'm volunteering at our vaccine center here in Park City, and I'm very excited for that we're getting back. And I'm trying to help get the country and the globe back on track. But I think it's going to be a while before we're back to whatever our new normal is. There's still more cycles of innovation to go, and so I would encourage any company who hasn't taken that time, do a corporate retreat. I don't go for a month in Hawaii like Benioff. I wish I could, but even when I was working full-time jobs, I created space every week where it was just quiet. I would do my commute home with no radio, no phone calls, once a week, just in 45 minutes. Or I would not wear my headphones on a run to just think, because I think that time to really kind of think and evaluate and be creative, give yourself creative space. The innovation that COVID is forcing on the world is not done. And there's a lot more opportunity out there.
Yeah, no. So I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'd say anybody listening, what you just described at Pluralsight was an absolute brilliant innovation. And it came out of this really kind of frustrating moment. We were all in, and you're right. Some companies saw this, and I mean, look, Zoom, good for them, but it was kind of a gimme. But yeah. Pluralsight, I know, Billy, you similarly, Billy, the founder of Chat Funnels, he had a similar moment where he's like, oh, we can shift this. And they created a bot that addressed kind of concerns around COVID. They gave it away to some of the states. And similar. So some people made lemon out of lemonade, like you described. So I think that's fascinating. Okay, so let's shift to what you're seeing in Q4, in Q5, or as some of us like to call it, or Q1 of this year. What's working right now that you're seeing from a growth perspective or a marketing perspective?
I think you can see this in the stock market. We're all excited. Everyone's so ready. It's like the week before the big party. Everyone is just, because we all just think the world is going to we're going to rip off the Band-Aid and this summer we'll be back to normal and it's going to be massive growth. And I'm hopeful that will be the case, but I think we'll be in a new normal for another year or two. And so what I'm seeing the more successful companies think about is, okay, look, we're going to be in a massive, I believe we're going to be in a massive growth environment sometime soon. And it's not going to be the same type of growth environment. The winners in that growth environment aren't going to be the same as they were in our old normal growth environment. So I would encourage everyone, the companies I'm seeing, talking to a ton of companies, advising and talking about board positions, the ones who seem to be poised best are really saying, okay, the Band-Aid's about to be ripped off. We're going to go through this massive phase of growth. How do we take advantage of it? Is it, and you see it with even financial instruments, like, do we look at raising money in new ways, like the SPAC market instead of the IPO market? Do we look at, the VC funding is, there's so much money to be put into companies right now. What's going to be the new norm, and how is your company going to take advantage of this? Because I think there's about to be a huge growth cycle, but it won't be the traditional ways we grew in the past. And that's why I would encourage every founder, every marketer, every sales leader to think about, how do we do things differently so that we get the biggest part of this big pie that's about to come out.
Okay, so I'm like, I'm like on my edge of my chair. What characterizes the individuals and the organizations that will capture that growth, and what characterizes the organizations that you think are going to probably miss it or be behind? Because whenever there's a kind of a moment like this, there's winners and losers, and anyone who can kind of figure out what the winners look like and the losers look like, they're going to make money. So what do the winners look like?
I think the winners right now are storing up for it's not the store, that's the wrong analogy, but are getting ready for this big party. Like their trainings, they're saying, look, we may not have outside sales reps in the future, so we're going to double down and hire. If it takes 6 months to ramp our inside sales reps, we're going to hire them now, because July, when the economy takes off even more and the floodgates open, they're going to be ramped and ready. So it's companies who are thinking about how to do things differently and starting right now. Like I got an email the other day, which I found interesting, or it was an article the other day from, it might have been a New York Times guest writer, that talked about traveling, and they were like, go out and book your flights now for end of 2021. And I was like, we don't know what it's going to be like. But they're like, you know what? You need to be prepared. You need to be first in line. You need to take the risk. So I think the companies that are going to do best are three things. One, they're thinking about innovating right now for what the world could be like. Mm-hmm. Two, they're spending into it, or either spending or planning into it right now. Like they're not sitting on the sidelines, because if they wait till the world comes back, the people who are planning for it are going to have leapfrogged them.
Well, they'll be there already.
Yeah. And the third thing is, back to what we talked about earlier, is especially if you're in a high growth phase, or should be in high growth phase, like, don't take no for an answer. Think the impossible, like dream the big dream. Because I think if you have those three things, if you're prepared for what's coming, you start working now, and you believe that anything is possible. And the one more I'll throw in there, I think it's also about product. Like I really believe in product-led growth. None of this works from a sales and marketing and revenue or growth perspective if you don't have an amazing product. So if your product needs work, get it done now.
It is a time for R&D, right? Like the best companies are pivoting, they're adapting. If you're not a Zoom, like like what you guys did at Pluralsight, you're like, how do I pivot and create a remote first environment, regardless whether you're security, whether you're, rev tech, whether you're, accounting and HR, doesn't matter. Like it's time to kind of like adapt your product, which I love where you just led us. So where are the gaps in technology? Like again, from your bird's eye view, as kind of a strategic leader in the rev tech, the marketing, or the growth space, what needs to be solved?
I think it's a couple things. One, and I don't know if this is so much a product as it is a process and a mindset on building this within your organization, is just really being analytical and data driven. Mm-hmm. I think the companies that we're seeing crushing it either are just, that had the amazing product at the right time, and not like Zoom, and not everybody gets that lucky. The other ones are analyzing everything that they're doing and really understanding what's working and what's not. And so if you don't have a really strong analytical data-driven approach to go to market, both marketing and sales, if you can't know at any given time how many top of the funnel leads and how much they cost, how they're converting to mid funnel, how they convert to bottom, what your win rate is, average deal size, if you can't spit those things off the top of your head as a sales or marketing leader, you're failing. And I think that companies that really can build in, I don't think there is tech involved, but there's not like, I wish there was a product that I could say, go buy this and you'll be amazing and successful. Yeah. No, I think it's building out that analytical data-driven motion. When I joined at Pluralsight, we did not have that. The company had an amazing brand and a fantastic creative team, and I convinced all those people to stay and continue working with me, but we didn't have an analytical data-driven mindset. And I've spent a good chunk of money on our tech stack, a good chunk of money on bringing in ops people. That was one of my first big hires. Then we started a series of stand-ups every week, systemized reporting. We started quarterly business reviews. I even got to where I would stop people in the hall. I told everybody, we had a big marketing all hands where I said, we're going to be a data-driven organization, and here's the big goals we're trying to achieve. And I need each of you to know what metrics you have for those goals and how you're doing on them. It can't be qualitative. So if you're a field marketing manager who runs events, and I stop you in the hall and ask you, tell me how it's going, I don't want to hear, oh, we had this amazing event and everybody loved it. No, I want to hear, we had an event with 30 people there, 300 million in pipeline. This much has progressed to stage 3, and this is what we expect the win rate to be, and we think it'll be this much in final revenue that we've influenced. Like, I want to hear, and so the first month, everybody ran from me in the halls. So that didn't work so well. Yeah. No one wanted me to ask them the questions.
Like going down stairwells to avoid you.
Totally, it was. And then it just became the motion of how we all worked. And we literally did a stand-up with like 30 people once a week or once every other week. And it was kind of painful. And you got to give 2 stats. And they had to be quantitative and objective. They could not be qualitative or subjective. And we went around the room, a good one and a bad one. And it just was to kind of build in this mindset. So it was a very long answer, but I think the answer to your question of what do companies need, if you can build in a way to set your goals, measure, and know what's working and what's not, it gives you unbelievable freedom to try things creatively. And hear me, I'm going to tell one example from Domo. Yeah. We were going to Dreamforce. We always saw you guys there. And I know we took a page from your book because Zant at the time, Inside Sales, did a great job at Dreamforce. And we were like, we're trying to do everything we can, but I had a pretty small marketing budget. So we're brainstorming. We'd been to Dreamforce 1 year. This is our 2nd year. And we knew it was our buyers were there. And the most junior person in the room said, hey, the hardest thing about working the booth last year at Dreamforce was I could never get a soda. And all the machines were sold out. And you have to walk 4 blocks to get to the closest place. And there's a line. What if we gave out sodas for a scan? And we thought, well, it's just a random scan going to be, they won't know anything about Domo. Like, is that going to be lucrative? But so we said, okay. So we had backpacks made that were refrigerated with our branding, and we got Domo koozies. And we gave out so much sodas. I mean, even the traffic cop, I have a picture with the traffic cop waving traffic, drinking a Domo. Yeah. I'm sure we gave him one when we didn't have a badge to scan. But because we were analytical, we spent maybe $7,000 on sodas and the backpack. And when we came back, we made over $300,000 off of deals from those scans. And because we measured it, then we could do bigger. So the next year we rented out breakfast places. The next year we wrapped coffee trucks and bought parking spots. The next year we wrapped cars and drove them around for a scan because we're like, what's the hardest thing? And every year Benioff was one step behind us. Whatever it was we did the year before, the next year you could pay Dreamforce to do. But only because we could measure it and know if it was successful were we able to be creative.
So let me pause you because I think you said one of the most innovative things I've heard in a long time. It's through, you're smiling, Eric, what did I say? It's through analytics and kind of this focus on data that allows creativity, which is a counterintuitive concept, right? And let me peel that back because I think it's actually a pretty genius concept. people generally assume that being very analytical and being very data driven is the opposite of creativity. It kind of is the killer of creativity. But the reason it allows that is you can try anything, right? If you're being analytical and you're just saying, look, we're going to try, let's give some budget to any crazy idea. Any, marketing intern says, let's try sodas, or let's try, shoelaces or whatever. You'll know. And so let me expand a little bit, because again, I think what you just shared might be one of the key highlights from this event. If you get nothing else, using analytics and tracking the effect of any sort of effort, you can develop your career. I think you can build a product. You can develop a marketing strategy, an overall growth strategy. You can create companies. Like, it allows you the thing that I think you just shared, Heather, is one of the keys in business. It's basically knowing your numbers, testing things, evaluating the effect of it, and I'll shut up here. But one last thing is listening. One thing we don't do is we don't listen to customers. We don't listen to prospects. We don't listen to other people. So you try something, let me put it this way. The way you can try things the way you can be effective is you listen to the junior marketing person who has an idea. We don't listen to customers enough. We don't listen to the resources we have. So I love where you just went with this.
And I'll bring this back to chat funnels for a minute. At both Domo and Pluralsight, we successfully used chat. And at first we got resistance. People didn't want to pay for another thing in the tech stack. Our BDR, SDR team was like, I can just talk to people. I don't they almost viewed it as, where they're taking their business. But once we installed a chat function, the chat leads were our best leads. They were like, I think it was either Domo or Pluralsight. They were like 10x in terms of conversion. And then we had fighting amongst the SDR team for who would sign up to take those leads, because they were so lucrative. People could hit their numbers faster with chat leads. So, but it was only because we measured it. And it's kind of like that with any technology that you're looking at. If you can measure it and show the success, and you know where things are working, then you can spend more, you can lean into it. And I think that's true for for tech investments. I think it's true for marketing plans. It's true for new sales teams you might want to put together. Like, are you going to look at an overlay industry group? Well, you got to be able to measure how successful that is. Or do you need to add more SDRs? Well, how much are each of the SDRs providing, and how much revenue is that? Everything can and should be measured.
So I think one of the things that also can be learned from this is, and we've talked about this role of growth, whether it's marketing or sales, or the consolidation or the amalgamation of that. I think the key skill behind that leader is an analytical skill. I think the days of having a growth leader be, a brand person, or being a creative person, which, by the way, you can be both. Those are not mutually exclusive concepts. I think, if you're sitting listening to this and you're like, but I am the brand person, or I'm the PR person, you can still be very analytical. Like, you created a culture of being data driven. Excuse me. At Pluralsight, anybody can, that's a decision. You don't have to be a mathematician. You can just emphasize the numbers, and you can surround yourself with people who are very versed with the numbers. So I think that is the theme of the new growth leader in the next, 2021 for sure. And I would say over the next 5 years.
And I think two things on that. One is, I think about Julie Kehoe, who you and I both know, and she worked for me at Domo, and she's fantastic. Probably one of the best people in comms you'll ever meet. And at Domo, she had charts that showed from her press articles how many people clicked through and became leads. And she could tell you how much revenue her press activities directly gave the company that year. And it was a lot. So just because you're creative or comms or whatever doesn't mean you can't have that mindset. I actually think the best leaders are folks who have both. And for people like myself, like my team used to tease me, I always say it's like the Supreme Court justice said about pornography. It's the same with creative. I know good creative when I see it, but I can't create it. So one of my first hires that I always make sure I have is somebody who's wickedly creative. And at Pluralsight, when I joined, Brett Barlow, who's one of my favorite people in the whole world, currently a Utah CEO, he he stayed on. He was the CMO, and he stayed on to be the chief brand officer. And he's wildly creative, and we would not have been as successful at Pluralsight without that. So, whatever you're missing as a sales or marketing leader, acknowledge it and be like, hey, here's my skill set. I know this area is not my strength. Then go hire somebody a gajillion times better than you. Somebody who honestly could, Brett had been a CMO at Skull Candy and other places. He could have gone a ton of places, but we got along, and I talked him into staying because I needed him. I needed his skill set. So don't be afraid to hire somebody better than you. That's the other kind of good advice.
Well, that takes some humility to do it, right? I mean, to be able to say, hey, look, I'm not, it sounds very David Goggins-esque, right? To say, look, I'm really bad at this. And you can, develop the skill, bring someone in who's much, much better. So you talk about some advice. You just mentioned that, and I'd love to get your sense, like, look into the future, the next, 3 years or 5 years. What are the trends? Like, how will growth leaders be successful? What will they be doing? What are the new approaches? I mean, we talked about data and being very analytical, but what are the other areas I think people should be thinking about?
So there's a couple answers to that. Just for any, I'm going to go very general, and then I'm going to go very specific.
Yeah, cool.
One of the big pieces of advice I give to anyone in any role at any stage in their career is that no matter what you're doing, knock it out of the park. Like, it is some of the worst jobs I've ever had that I hated the most, that I thought were so crappy and beneath me, that I just knocked it out of the park. And someone I didn't even know was watching and gave me an opportunity to do something amazing. And this goes, like, I was on a school, like, how I think one of the ways I ended up at Domo is I was on a school board with Mike, who worked at Omniture, and he, and I impressed Mike on the school board. So when they reached out, when somebody told Josh about me, he called Mike Herring and said, what do you know about this woman? And he said, oh my gosh, she's phenomenal. I've worked with her for 3 years on a school board, and she runs circles around everybody. And, of course, Josh was like, oh, but had he not had that, I don't know if Josh would have called me to come interview for CMO. So you never know so whatever it is you take on, don't take it on unless you can crush it. Yeah. And so that's because you just don't know. So that's my broader advice. Very specific, I think, to marketing and sales. I think with COVID and kind of our new normal, we're going to continue to do things in remote and digital ways. And so things that your company can do to take advantage of that, look at investing in that. And I think at the same time, we're going to see tech is going to get more and more restrictions on, because basically tech's had just, kind of been a wide open white space for
free run.
Yeah, free run. And in some ways, as a marketer, I absolutely love it. Like, because I can get so much information on somebody. Yep. But as a citizen, sometimes I'm like, wow, that is a little scary. I think that's going to narrow as well. I think we're going to see the government finally realize that they need to get some people involved that understand technology to figure out how to put some regulations in place. And I'm not on either side of how strict or not strict those regulations should be, because I can see all views, but it's just the reality. So I think on one hand, we're going to need to do more digitally. It's going to need to be more personalized. We're going to do more things remote, which is going to need to make that connection feel even stronger, because you're not sitting next to somebody at an event watching Michelle Obama sharing your experience. You're in your own home doing things. And so on one hand, you're going to have to do more of that. On the other hand, I don't know what they will be, but I think there will be more restrictions coming up. So I would challenge all growth, marketers, revenue, et cetera, to think about how can you take advantage. I've seen some really interesting things back to analytics in the account-based marketing space, some really interesting things in engagement. You're going to have to think out of the box to how to build these connections with your customers and prospects in a digital and remote environment.
So all super fascinating. So again, what I heard from you is, like, be ready for privacy, lots and lots of privacy. Definitely be ready for thinking about this new norm is going to probably, what I'm hearing from you is kind of the forever norm. It's some variation of this. We're not going to go back to big events necessarily where we're all just,
I hope so, Dave. I hope so, because they're my favorites. I was thinking about that the other day. I'm putting up pictures in my office of, some work. It's my workspace. And I have all these amazing pictures of all these amazing events. And I hope we do. But, I look at Pluralsight. We did I stayed through our first Pluralsight Live that was 100% virtual. And it cost us a heck of a lot less money. And we had triple the pipeline at it.
Right.
So I still think at the heart of buying, a really great sales rep who I worked with at Oracle, and I was in product at Oracle. And he went to him, I said, you make this, you're in the 2 comma club and you make all this money and I'm just getting a little product manager salary. Like, this is bullshit. And I said, we should totally, why am I not, and he said, Heather, what you don't realize is by the time I've brought you in, they've already decided they want to buy from me.
Yeah.
They want to partner with me. I've convinced them that we should be in this partnership together. Now, these were really big deals, but I think that's still the need for human connection and trust and wanting to partner with someone doesn't go away. And I'm hoping in the future we can bring back more in-person things. But until then, how do we do it remotely a bit? And even in the future, I think it's going to be a hybrid because it's more cost effective to not do it in person.
I've always said people always buy from people, because it's not about the product itself. The product has to do what it needs to do and it needs to be great. But I also want to have this kind of conversation and say, all right, Heather, I'm going to buy from you. I'm going to trust you. Take care of me if something happens. And as long as you say, yeah, I'm going to take care of you, Dave, I'll do it. I'll take the journey. So this is amazing, by the way, all of this advice. I think we're at the end of our time. Heather, there's oh my gosh, there's so much that we could have delved into, but there's some really good nuggets from this. Thank you for doing this. Again, guys, this is some of the best advice I think you'll ever hear, at least in the current context. So one of the highlights, one of the luminaries in this industry. Thank you for doing this. I really can't express enough appreciation.
Oh, thanks, Dave. I always love conversations with you. Anytime you call me for a conversation, I'm in, whether it's with several thousand other people or just me and you. I love chatting with you.
All right. I'll take you up on it. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Heather. And we'll make sure we have you in another event.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.